Hello, today I'm going to try and do a QAZ build. This is the first time I'm doing a build video, so I expect it to be quite rough. For this build, what you're going to need, obviously, a QAZ. It will come roughly packaged like this. It comes in a jiffy bag, at least it does in the UK when we order from America. Comes with a top plate. This is where your switches will go into. Make sure that's the right way around so when I use it. Comes with the PCB itself. As you can see, it's not the full length on the PC on the socket area. We will get into that later. Back of it. And a bottom plate. This is just basically to keep it on the desk. Also comes with the required diodes, offsets, bumpy feet, and little washers. It doesn't come with as many offsets as are in this bag, and that's because I've taken some out from a previous build. So in this video, what I'm going to show you to do is A, how to build the QAZ itself, B, show you how to lube your switches and stabilizers, and flash your microcontroller. So back to the things that you'll need for this build. So obviously your QAZ, you'll need a soldering iron. Now I recommend, if you're going to get a soldering iron, get one that's got the ability to change the temperature. Has that just gone down? Has my network just gone down? Don't know. Make sure this. No, it's still alive. Cool. Then you'll need keycaps. Now, obviously they won't come in a glass jar for you. This is just so I can keep them easier. You will also need solder. Now this particular solder is, I'm not sure you're going to be able to see that properly. You might be able to, yeah, 0.5 mil, so it's quite thin. Most solders you'll get slightly thicker than this. You'll need stabilizers. So the stabilizers for this, you'll need two 2U stabilizers. Now when you buy stabilizers, what you'll actually get is a pack like this, which has 7 or a 6.25U and a couple of other 2Us. For the QAZ, you only need two 2Us, and that's only if you're doing, if you follow this build exactly, a split spacebar. You can just go for a straight spacebar, in which case you need the 6.25U. You will also need a socket. Now you can either get strips and build the socket like this, or you can get an actual real socket, which I shall get like this. Now, obviously if you bought this, it wouldn't have the hole. The one's missing. This is just because this is a one I use in order to leg my microchips. Microcontrollers. You'll also need a microcontroller. This is a let's try that again. a BitC, which is not the easiest thing to see considering the amount of lighting I've got going on, and this camera. It relatively cheap Microcontroller, and I will have links to all these in the description. So, first off, we're going to do some lubing. Now, you don't have to lube your switches. That's a good thing. Good point. You will also need your switches. Now, for this particular build, I'm going to use cherry blacks. You don't have to use cherry blacks. You can use any particular switch you like. Cherry blacks are linears. So I just checked. You will need 30. If you're doing a split keyboard, you'll need 30 switches for this. And they're these particular switches are relatively cheap. You can get cheaper ones like Gaterons. I personally prefer Gaterons to cherries, and that's just due to the fact they are pretty smooth and have a nice sound to start with. You can also obviously use any switch you prefer. Now, for as far as I can tell, I shall check again. But as far as I'm aware, the QAZ only supports MX style. Yes, it does not support chalk, so you would have to use MX style switches for this build. Okie dokie. Lubing. Now, lubing, some people find it daunting. Now, I didn't do this till very recently. Started lubing. There's a joke in there somewhere. The reason for that is I didn't see a huge benefit from what general switches were. Then I tried it because it's always good to try new things. And yeah, I found that lubing absolutely does aid your builds. As doing films and other modifications is entirely personal preference, and personally films, there is such an you would only need that if you're having a ton of wobble in your switches, and most switches really don't wobble that much, to be honest. Right then. Let's get the only two I actually need for this out. Yeah. So for lubing of switches, Krytox is the default. Everyone uses Krytox. This is 205G0. That's what you use generally for switches. If you're using non-linears, using tactiles, there is a different technique to lubing itself. This is 205G, 203G0 in fact for this one, or 205G2 you can use for your stabilizers. So we'll do the stabilizers first because, well, they're the quickest ones to do, basically. So now, stabilizers are a pain in the ass, basically, but it's just a technique that everyone, if you're getting into lubing, in fact, if you're getting into mechanical keyboards in any sense you need to know and learn. So, again, use the 205G two. Sorry about that. Yeah, so 205G. That's fine. 205G2 for your stabilizers. It's 205G0 in that at the top. Yeah, 205G2 for your stabilizers. So, easiest technique for this: small amount of lube on your brush. Just try and get the best technique not to knock every single thing off my desk, because that would be quite annoying. Let's turn those lights off for now. So, there is a hold side and a solid side. Hold side is where the stabilizer arm is going to go into. So with your small amount of lube, you want to brush on each side walls and the back wall. Now, some people also lube the stem as well. I don't. I mean, there's no reason not to. There's no reason to do it really. I mean, why not, eh? So for that, just very, three strokes on each side with a small amount of lube on it. This is the most boring, one of the most boring things in the universe to do for some people. Some people find it therapeutic because it's very easy. For me, makes no difference, to be honest. Now, don't over lube. So lubrication is pretty obvious what it's for. It's just for making things slightly smoother. Now, if you over lube, you'll actually make it sticky. So less is, in this case, more. It's standard saying, to be honest. There is a technique to it. It just takes practice. If you want to practice at this, I would recommend getting a hot swap board, mainly because to get stabilizers off requires desoldering if you solder. So once you've done your housing, then we need to we don't need to, but it's up to you. Then we need to lubricate the legs itself, the stabilizer arms. So for this, we only need to lubricate that section there. Try that again. That section there. You don't need to lubricate the middle part because nothing's going to touch it. For this, you want a relatively good amount of lube on it. Not a ton, but enough that not necessarily visible, but at least it's got a sheen to it. So take your stabilizer housing and your stabilizer stem, and there are two holes on this, which is that. You want to stick the leg into the arm into the bottom hole. So get this into here. Once in there, lubricated leg into that bottom hole and clip it in. So as you can see, the only places are lubed with things that are going to get in contact with the actual stabilizer itself. Now, I'd recommend once after you've lubed, you need to wash your hands. Just general good hygiene anyway. But it's sticky stuff and gets everywhere. So, yeah. Okay. Now, to check that you've done this correctly, just make sure that when it's on a flat surface, you pull up one leg, hold in the middle, that both legs come up. If only one comes up, then you've got it in the wrong hole. Yeah. As we all know, if you put things in the wrong hole, people complain. So, luckily this is targeted adults, not children. Although children might not get that, I suppose. Now the reason we use G2 for stabilizers is it's a thicker lube than G0, and because the amount these move and the way these move, that's the reason we use the thicker lube. There you go, see, wrong hole. that's backwards. Both legs come up. Those are now done. Okay, I'll be right back. Going to wash my hands. Right then. Now we move on to the next one, which is the switches itself. Now this is, some people find this extremely boring and just with the stabilizers. It's not, it's not essential. Now I recommend using a different brush to the one that we use for the stabilizers, and that's because it's a different thickness. So I recommend a few brushes for lubing. So you don't need a tool to get this open, and depending upon which switches you have, depends which tool you use. So for example, for this I use I can't remember what it's called actually, but it has, it's a duo of some variety. It has box switches tool, and on the other side it has MX style switches. So MX style switches have housing that these, let's try that again. These legs plug into. This is for the outside, and this unclips them. Box switches in the hand, they have like a different area. So let's start undoing some switches. Now this is a right bugger. There's no other way of saying that. It takes some patience to do it. Don't get frustrated with it. They are a bugger. Also try not to lose your parts. So I'll show you the parts. So we have bottom housing. This is where the legs go that go into the actual PCB. You can either get 3 pin, so this is a 3 pin, or 5 pin. 5 pin have 2 extra legs here that hold it into the PCB easier. A 5 pin can always be turned into a 3 pin just by cutting them off. A 3 pin cannot become a 5 pin. Then you have your spring. This is the part that dictates the difference between different switches effectively, apart from the clicky, linear and tactile. This is one of the main parts that dictates this. Then you dictates the weight of the switch. Then you have your stem. So this is a linear switch. Linear switches have, let's try that again. Linear switches have no bump on this leg, on these legs. It's really hard to get a good picture of that. And because I've only got a very basic camera setup. So for lubing of these, we lube everything, including the legs, but if you, let's try and get a good angle, let's try that way, yeah, apart from the legs, which are those bits there. For tactile switches, you do not want to lube them. You can lube everything else, just don't lube the legs. And then you get your top housing. This dictates quite a lot of the sound in a linear switch. Different plastics, different way the feedback sounds when it hits the top housing again. Clears sound different to black, which sound different to milky. I prefer milky tops because they sound nicer in my opinion. Everyone's preference is different. So I tend to do sets of 4s when I'm doing my switches, mainly because it's easy to keep track of all the parts. So the reason I do it in this particular order when I'm doing it is due to the fact that you lube your bottom housing first, then you lube your spring, which then goes into the bottom housing, then you lube your stem, which goes into the spring, which goes into the bottom housing, and then you close it. So it just makes it easier to work out exactly which order you have things in. And so you don't need a tool for this. There is a way of doing it, taking these switches apart. I would recommend a tool. They are relatively cheap. You can get plastic ones. This kit that I have for lubing came with a plastic switch opener for MX style and came with a stem holder. Now I personally don't bother with the stem holder. It just gets in the way, it just slows you down basically. Now I lube switches relatively fast. I just do it, whether it's fast or not is a different matter. To be honest, the taking apart is the longest part of lubing. As I say, I do sets of 4. It doesn't mean I do 4 at a time. It just means I do and the only reason I do sets of 4 is because that's the width of this wrist rest. If I had a longer wrist rest, I might do sets of 8 or something, but sets of 4 makes it easier for me to keep track of where I am. Also fits on this wrist rest pretty easily. To take these apart, it's literally a case of align the switcher, line the legs with the housings, and push down. It's the same with the free one I got. It's a relatively easy process. Now the other way of doing this is with like tweezers. I would not recommend that because you're more likely to just stab yourself than you are to get the switch open, and it's just going to hurt. Now after a while, say for example you're doing a full board, like 60%, which is 72 switches I believe, I could be wrong, can't quite counting right now, but something like 72 switches, or you might be 67 and you need 70. This does get seriously tedious. Now for 30 switches it's not going to be difficult. Getting on to the last set till I start lubing, and then we'll start closing them up and then move on to the next set. As I say, you only need 30 switches for a QAZ if you're doing a split. If you're doing a non-split, then you only need 29. That's literally the difference between split and non-split. I mean, I could do a non-split, but I prefer split keyboards, split spacebars, if the board supports it, and there's any reason for it, I suppose. So on a 60%, generally I don't bother with a split spacebar. I don't live in Japan, thus I don't need that split. If you are Japanese, you'll understand what I'm on about there. But for me, I don't need a split spacebar on a 60% or higher. Anything lower, so for example, on a split board itself, like the software that's there, split spacebar is by definition. It just makes things slightly easier. I also do prefer things mapped in a certain way, which I will show you once we get to that stage. And then lubing time. So for this, it's a relatively simple process. Small amount of lube again, just enough to basically cover the brush. So the housing on this is relatively simply built. Let's try and get it into a camera angle that works. So you want to lube the inside of these legs, the housing, and lube around the center pole. Just a quick brush, just clearing anything up that you leave excess around the center pole. Then the spring. Now for this, it's just the ends. You can lube the entire thing if you want to. For this, the spring, the only real parts you really need to do are the very ends, and the reason for that is when it squishes down, it'll self-lubricate the rest of it. Onto the stem, and then now we get onto the shaft itself, stem. I suppose stem is a better word. For this, we lubricate the. See if we can get a good angle on this. Yep. So for this, we lubricate that middle part, the back housing, the front housing, and the legs. So the way I do this is simply a couple of strokes on sides, clearing up any excess. Do the front, the legs, next side, and then the back, or the other way around, depending upon which way around I have stuck the switch down. Now I don't close every switch straight away, I wait till I've got down a set and then close it, because otherwise you're spending more time trying to close them and open them than you are doing the actual job of lubing them. Now this is a not exactly any difficult task. It's just semi-laborious. So yeah, we want the inside of the spring, just the ends of it. I mean, just like the brush going in, basically. Side, back, side, front, and legs. Onto the spring, if I can manage to do that. There we go. That's it. It's a relatively easy task, this, and it does honestly make a difference to the way your switches feel. And again, with the same with this, less is more. You'll start to, if you do enough of these builds, as you can see, there's a few builds on my desk that you can see. There's 3 that you can see straight away. Once you start to get a knack for this, you start to learn roughly how much lube you need for your personal preference. Now it's entirely personal preference. This entire hobby is personal preference, so. But it does, for me, definitely make a difference on lubing. And again, once you have finished doing all the lubrication, I would recommend washing your hands, because this stuff is not the best when it comes to the human body. It's not toxic, but it's just, you don't want to eat it. Okay, now we've done the first set, we then put the housings back on. Now, make sure that they are the right way around. So there is a hole on the front of this, that corresponds with a hole on the front of here. And just push together. You don't have to use the same top housing that came with it. They all roughly fit. They're just manufactured in that way. And you can also make Franken switches, so if you have multiple switch types, you might prefer milky tops to black plastic tops, in which case, build them how you want. So this is definitely a less is more job. As I said, if you put too much lube on, then they become sticky, basically. And the whole point of lubricating is to make smooth, not sticky. If you wanted a sticky switch, just pour some Coke on them. They'll get pretty sticky with that. say you can use the stem holders. It just stops your hand getting slightly less messy. Stops your hand getting more messy. It just, in my opinion, slows down way too much when lubing. Now, some people find this, as I said, therapeutic, in which case they might prefer that pace. For me, this is just lubing. I'm not sure if I would recommend a lube station. Basically, just means it's easier to keep your taken apart switches in check, effectively. What might put it? I mean, the springs, if you drop a spring, they are relatively hard to see. If you drop one of the stems and you have a black carpet, for example, then not going to be the easiest thing in the world to find. Now, I think I've slightly over-lubed this one. So if you have overlube, just clear your brush as much as you can, and then very lightly basically brush off the lube. It helps if I point that towards the location. Yeah, so for this, the legs themselves need to point towards the metal contact so that they can close the switch. Actually, I think it's opening the switch is what they do. I must be closing. Okay. Nearly halfway through the lubing of the switches. The lubing of the switches is relatively one of the longest parts of lubing, building a board. It's just one of those things. You can either do it or not do it. Obviously, don't do it. It's a lot quicker to build a board. But if you're soldering, then doing this afterwards would be a real pain in the ass. Nearly coming up to the hour mark, and we have 3/4 of an hour, and I haven't yet even for soldering. As I say, if you're not doing lubing, you could probably build this in a pretty short period of time. The reason I'm doing the lubing is just so that it's a full build and a full technique, so that if anyone does want to follow along, they know every part of building a board. And as I said, this is my first attempt at doing this on camera, so it is going to be rough. I don't have a speaking technique or anything, so all the best doing for putting those switches together, it seems. Halfway through them. Right, halfway through, but nearly halfway through. You saw when I was pulling them out, I didn't pull them out in a particular way, so I don't actually know what you've got on the desk. Might need to get more out. actually managed to get the right number. It'd be amazing if I have. That's 24. 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. So if you are buying, if you haven't already bought your switches, I would recommend always buying one more pack than you actually need. Buy the exact number you want, and something goes wrong, you lose a spring, you lose a switch, you lose a stem. You know, if you've only got the exact number you need, it's not a good day you're going to have. So yeah, if you buy an extra pack, at least you've got well, buy an extra pack, you've got 10 spares. If you buy, if you're building something bigger than a QAZ, for example, so for example, 60%, you need to buy 7 packs, because you will not have enough. It must be 67. You will not have enough if you only buy 6 packs. You would think, being a 60%, that there are 60 switches. There's more than 6 switches. I mean, there's 27 just in the alphas. Watch this, we'll find out that I can't count and I need more than 30 switches for QAZ. I'm pretty certain I don't, due to the way the QAZ is built, but we'll soon find out, won't we? We can find out how many we need, and I'll do that before I put all the lubing stuff away, just in case I do need more than 30. By doing a quick count. As you can see, the reason I do 4 at a time is, as I said, because it is how many fit in a line, but also once you get past 4 and you've built them again, or partially built them, you have a high chance of knocking them off, and thus losing parts of them. actually recording this as well as streaming this on Twitch. The reason I'm recording it is because I'm going to do this into keyframes so that people who want to skip the lubing part can skip it, because some people know how to lube, some people have no reason to want to lube, in which case why watch the part on lubing. Also less of my voice if you missed that part, because I am talking to fill dead air. And that's mainly because I didn't go through the effort of figuring out how to add music. Because I'm lazy. And it's way overlooped. Also, I'm not sure if this is all interesting. As I say, first time, might be the last time, depending on how how ill or well received this is. But you know, we'll take the rough with the smooth, won't we? As long as I'm not too quiet and people can actually hear me, I suppose that's a good thing. We could, I suppose, do a sound test in this. I mean, depending on how good the microphone is, how good your speakers / headphones are, will determine how well a sound test goes. Obviously, I will also be showing typing on it at the end once it's built. Put these down here, out of the way of the soldering iron. Ready for that to take place, because we are nearly at that point now. As I say, we're going to do a check to make sure I've got the correct number of switches before moving on to soldering, because you don't want to stop soldering. Well, you don't. It doesn't matter if you stop soldering. But you don't want to change what you're doing from one test to the next. You want to keep in a rhythm what you're doing. So if you're soldering, do soldering, don't then switch halfway through to do lubing, for example. Though if you're lubing, do lubing. Now I would recommend, if this is your first time you're trying to do a full build, not just sticking switches into a hot swap board and adding some keycaps, for example, which is a perfectly valid thing to do in this hobby. Different stages, different parts that you learn. If you are doing a full build, of course a true full build would be cabling, building your own cable, building your own case, all the rest of it, but we'll do it for now, full build. Then I would recommend, if this is your first one, doing it in stages. So, for example, do the lubing one day, maybe do the soldering another day, split soldering up if you want, even if it's over a couple of hours, and just take your time. Your first build will possibly have mistakes, hopefully it won't. Hopefully you'll do it perfect. I mean, I still make mistakes, and I've done a ridiculous number of builds so far. This is the first time on video though. But yeah, if you try not to make mistakes, obviously, and if you do it slowly, do it in a rhythm, do it when you're not frustrated, do it when you're in a good place as such, you won't make mistakes, you'll get it right, and you'll have a working keyboard at the end of it. Nearly done with this set, this part of the build. Not quite done, but nearly done. Because there's so few switches left to do, let's do the counting to make sure we do need 30. I'm pretty certain we need 30. So, easy way of doing this, let's just count them. Have I counted wrong? Let's try that again, shall we? Yep, it's 38. Not even 30, it's 38. So yeah, I can't count. I don't actually have enough switches for this. I might not even have enough switches with me, which would be hilarious. So the reason I'm doing two is because I'm doing a split board. If you're only doing a null board, then you don't count the, you probably don't count these two. This one you definitely count. Yeah, but I'm doing a split board, so all this bottom row. 38. Yep, I just can't count, it seems. So we have 31 here, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, and 4 spare. I probably still can't count, and there probably isn't 4 spare. Next one. Yeah, I even wrote down on the script 30 switches, so I really can't count. That's why it's always good to check before ordering stuff. Also good to have more than you need, because if I'd only got 30 and I needed 38, then I needed one more pack. Now, do I leave that part I can't count in the video for YouTube? Yeah, probably. Can't imagine how big this file's going to be though from this recording, especially the end of it. I mean, we're up to 1 hour, 10 minutes. So that's the 30 I said, but we need 38. To make this easier to make certain that we have got a correct number, once I've finished lubing these, then I will stick them into the correct location on the plate. That way, if I do need more, and I still can't count, at least they'll be in the correct location, and I'll know how many I need left. Now, because there's only 2 left of the required number, it's pointless. and I've got a relatively wide armrest. Might as well stick them all on one side left. Well, ones that are left for now until I find out I still can't count. Anyway. And then I'd also recommend if you are looping, it is a relatively boring task, so stick some music on, get into a very corny, we'll get into a groove about it, and yeah. I realise, based on every now and then when I look up, you probably can't see what I'm doing, so for the last two, since they're just there, I will definitely do show you how to, where I'm brushing on camera. Down to the end of this part, Crytox is one of those things where when it comes into stock, if you are doing multiple builds, I would recommend just getting more than you need, to be honest. Because it comes into stock on most vendors pretty rarely now, especially during the pandemic. It's been one of those definitely hard things to come by. So yeah, if are going to do multiple builds, just overstock. You can always not use them. You don't have to use all of your stuff. I mean, for example, this is a 10-gram pot. The little ones are 5-gram pots. Yeah. And this 10-gram pot has so far done 120, 130 switches roughly. Including ones I didn't need to do because they came preloaded, which was irritating. Then I forgot that. As according to some people, I do the lubing of my switches relatively quickly. I don't know if I do, but to do, well, 38, it seems to be taking me about 35 seconds a switch. I mean, I could be completely out there. Someone can correct me in the comments if I still can't count. And as I said, for these last two, I'll do it definitely towards more of the camera. So, as I said, brushing the inside of the legs around the stem. Dropping the screw, always a good idea. Again, this is exactly why you buy more switches than you need. I have enough switches that I honestly don't care if I lose parts of them. Now, for someone who's doing a build, this would be, I wouldn't say devastating, but definitely an irritation factor. Okay. Try that again, shall we? So this is just a case of the end of the springs. What's the ends? On the stem. And the legs. A couple of strokes on that side, a couple of strokes on that side. That side. The leg. And the legs. Let's do that again. So we have the leg areas, center, ends of the spring, back on the stem, back over the switch, good idea. Back of the housing, overlaying, the front and the legs. And as I say, if you're using tactile switches as opposed to linears, you do not want to do the legs. Now we've done that, before we put the lube away and everything else, let's verify that we've got the correct number of switches. So, now we are going to take these out of here, so before we all of them anyway, we're going to take because I haven't clicked this switch together, that's why it's difficult to make sure it's definitely housed together before we try and sticking it into the plate. So it doesn't matter if they're the right way around, to be honest. It's just habit that I am checking if they're the right way around. On this stage, obviously, if you're doing this yourself and you're following along, as you can see, that's not the right way around. Because its pins aren't the correct way around. If you're doing this, following this along and doing it yourself, then you'll have bought the correct number of switches. And you will need to check that 38 is the number you need. Just one nice switch, I suppose. Another one to get. Again, gotta keep this part in the video when I upload it to YouTube. Oh well, we need one more. Okay. Let's put that ready. That's it. I'm not worried about which way around they are because I'm not getting ready to solder this in. If I was getting ready to solder this in, well, for a start, I would be aligning up the stabilizers on the board and making sure that was right before even attempting this. And it seems I did. It's 37 you need, not 38. Don't need that one. And last but not least, right. So the advantage of doing this as well is that that's not sticking in. Is that they are now, they're not going anywhere, so you can put them out of the way. Okay, let's put this stuff away. Covering my keyboard in lube, always good. And then put them away, don't need them. And I shall go wash my hands. Washed hands, always good. Okay. So the first thing we need to do when it comes to the actual building is we need to take our diodes here and they need to be bent. And the reason for that is they need to go through the holes. So they are going to go through all of these extra holes here, the ones that are, let's try this again, all of these holes. So the ones that are shiny basically on this side, well, most of them anyway, that's where the diodes are going to go. So they actually go through on this side for a start. Always a good plan to put them in the correct way around. I suppose in a sense it doesn't matter as long as they don't go around, but they will. If you put them this way around on this side, they are going to conflict with the switches. So, well, I should be able to count this number really to get the number of switches I need. There's one for every switch. So I do these in batches of about 5 roughly. So we need to, now if you're doing this following on, I would recommend doing this in stages. So that some people use a tool for this. Again, not needed. So the way to bend diodes is place them in your fingers so they are thumb and finger on the diode itself. Take your hand, bring along your fingers, bend. Now I just pre-bent that slightly. You want this relatively even legs, and that's literally the shape you want, is that. So now we'll go through the hole and then done. So we want, as I said, well, 37 it seems, 37 of these. So you can do this in batches, you can do this all at once. I would recommend doing this in batches. So the way I do it, especially with this build, is I do the number in a direction on a row, potentially. So, diodes have, let's see if it's going to focus. Is it going to focus on that? Might not be able to focus on that. Might not be able to focus. Can it focus? Yes. So there's a black line there. That black line needs to point towards, so on the board there is, so for example on, we'll do this one. So for example on this one, there is a circular pad. Let's try and get this in the right location. It's reversed on my screen, so it's a bit harder. There is a circular pad. The square pads. So the square pad is that one, circular pad is that one. The diode needs to point towards the square pad. So most of these face the same way, but not all of them do. So for example, these two face an opposite direction. So you'll see they're all facing one way, and then this last one faces the opposite way. So I tend to, when I'm building, especially QAZ, look for the ones that are the odd ones. So any that are, for example, any that are, rather than going across, are going downwards. Makes it easier to work out exactly where you're up to. Also makes it easy to spot when you miss one. So, as a black line towards the square. One. So once that's in place, then I tend to bend the legs, and the reason for this is just so that I can turn it back over without them falling out. You can tape them in place and thus keep the legs straight. It's your choice. So this is why I say I do this in batches, is because then you can solder just the small number you're trying to do at that point. If you try and put them all through and then solder, you're going to heat your soldering iron for a very long time, which is not necessarily a bad thing, and B, you're going to potentially lose track of where you're up to. Do it in batches, you'll save some headaches. Is that all the ones facing downwards? It certainly looks that way. Okay. So now you can, if you wish to, you can unbend the legs once it's the right way around. Now this, you don't need to. You can skip that part and just cut them off at a bent angle. It doesn't really matter. Most soldering irons, especially the one I'm going to link to, do come with certain tools automatically with them. So, for example, so that's now on. So when soldering, you'll need you don't need a sponge. It does come with a little like thing. It's useless, but yeah, you need a sponge. That's just to get the end of the soldering iron clean. You'll need a set of wire clippers. This particular set does come with a set. There's tweezers and various other things that you do need and does come with it. So now once we're at this stage, just waiting for the soldering iron to heat up. So if you've got one that can adjust the temperature. Now for this instance, I am doing, it's a bit high, 3, just make sure I've got the right setting. About 360, 350. Make sure your soldering iron tip is nice and hot. Okay. And then we solder. So, leg on, bring the solder to it, and then that is now soldered. I will solder all of these. In and then show you what it looks like. Now I've got solder on itself rather than actually on the joint. Always good. Now, I'd recommend if you're doing a lot of builds, then get that was quite hard of it. Get a extractor fan. So, as you can see on here, let's try and get it to focus. The solder isn't higher than the surface, it's not come through, it's literally just to cover the hole effectively and make sure the pins are in. So now let's get rid of the legs. Now if you are socketing your chip, which I will show you what that looks like, but I'm not showing you the technique itself, you want to keep the legs. Now I've already legged my socket, so I have no need to keep the legs. Not the cleanest one yet. That will do. Okay. But yeah, you want to, if you're socketing, which I would recommend, socketing your chips, legging and socketing your chips. Main reason for that is if anything goes wrong, especially if you bought a Pro Micro or something, it makes it easier to take it off again rather than trying to desolder it. So let's take a few of these. Place. So you can use, there is a tool called a Diode Bender, I think it is, that allows you to do this. It's not needed. I mean, if you've got massive fingers, then maybe that is a good technique. Don't really have massive hands, so and as I said, so that's practically done. So as I said, what I do is find the ones that are different directions. 1, 2, 3, 4, different direction to the rest. Yep. So the black line goes towards the square pad. Now if you don't have a square pad, a lot of manufacturers do make them that way. But if your particular board, especially if you're doing a different build to a QAZ, and it doesn't have a square pad, there'll be a little arrow on the. Hopefully there'll be a little arrow on the board. If there's not, then you're going to be in a world of pain, basically. It's definitely all the right ones going in the same direction. Yeah, see, I missed one going downwards. This is why it's, as I say, it's always recommended to do these in batches. Try and do them all at once. You're going to miss some. Try not to do that, obviously. Not a good technique. Another one I'll leave it in the video when I upload it to YouTube. Yeah, why not me? Okie dokie. Okay, so that's just underglow. Right then, so now we've got all of them going a different direction to the majority. We'll start doing rows. So for this, I generally do count out the number I need. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So for 5, so I need 5. I have 2 already. So let's get 3 more. Coming up to the 2-hour mark on this build. So let's say black to the square hole. Now let's turn over, unbend the legs. Now you don't have to unbend the legs, you can leave them bent if you want to. It just makes it harder to cut them nicer, neater. And if you get the end of your solder iron rather than on the place you're trying to solder, just clean the soldering iron with the sponge. Always recommend to wet the sponge before you start as well. That's a badly done one. But it doesn't. It's not going to interfere with the switch, so it doesn't really matter. Obviously, I'm not trying to sell this board, so again, it doesn't matter either. Right then, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for this one, this side, this row. Now, obviously, that wouldn't have happened if I left it pre-bent, because it wouldn't have moved out of place. So black hole, black line to the square hole. Okay. So they're all a bit neater. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 for this one. I say it doesn't matter when you bend them if you keep them all the same direction, just as long as when you put them in the holes you pay attention to which way they are facing. So this is the problem with doing this technique. So you'll get some that are like that. So we can focus that. Yes, some that are nice, and then some that are a bit not so good. I mean, that's where the tool comes in. But it doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, obviously, each person's going to want different results from their boards, and some want absolute perfection. I mean, if you really wanted absolute perfection, this board does also support surface-mounted diodes, which I won't be showing in this video for obvious reasons. But you could do surface-mounted as well. This board also supports underglow. Again, not something I'll be showing in this video. The main reason for that is I ain't got any underglows with me. So, I'll show you that. As you can see, we are quite a fair bit into the actual build of the board now, and this has taken a lot less time than just doing the lubing. just looked at this, there is one of my solders that I wouldn't think is very good. So I'm just going to redo that one. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7. Always be checking when you're putting your diodes in that you've got them the way around, because your board won't work. Well, at least that row won't work if they are the wrong way around. So that's all of them in. We are nearly done with this part. I'm just trying to get them all correct. be right back. I'm going to be recording for 2 hours. Did I start at 1? Yeah. Oh, okay. Then how have I done an extra half an hour on top of that? Nearly fuel. And a few. Right then. So now it's time to put the socket in. So as I said, I pre-cut mine to the right length, and the reason for that is, if you follow the guide on QAZ's website, these last 3 pins aren't needed on this side. So we need to have this side in, and this side needs to go from the top, leaving those 3 pins empty. And the reason for that is, once they're in, the switch will, its legs come through, if you get a 5 pin especially, but its legs come through that hole there. Let's try that again. Through that hole. So if you have a socket in the way, it's not going to come through. So this is the trickiest one to get right. So once it's in the correct location, make sure it's relatively flat to your surface, and we'll go down all these pins and solder. I don't think that's a good solder, so just slightly put some more on there. So the next thing to do is make sure that you can see that they are all well soldered. There's nothing else missed. Okay, so before we go on to anything else, it's time for our sponsor. Just kidding. We want to make sure that we have definitely covered all of the correct places. So, I mean, I've got a couple of bad looking. They would have functioned fine. Diodes. We just want to make sure that we've definitely got every single one before we move on to any of the next step. Okay, that looks good. So, when I said about legging, so this is I've pre-legged my chip. So as you can see, there are legs in this. Now it won't come like this. The reason you do this is the holes on this particular and on the other socket are round. Now if you buy headers, unless you buy round headers, you'll get square headers, and square headers won't go in round holes. As we all learnt in kindergarten, square pegs, round holes don't work. So the way to do this with your chip, and the reason for this is so that you can take it out again. The reason you do this, the way to do this is, I'd recommend getting one of those other sockets. I mean, they are really, really cheap. That's what you keep these for. So this is literally just one of these, multiple times. You've got tons left from doing that, so there's no real reason you wouldn't want to do it. And the benefit is, now I've done this, is you can plug it in. It's just a case of lining up the legs correctly, which is a lot harder than it should be. Each one myself, get trimming correctly, make sure that when doing it on camera is a bit harder. There we go. Okay, so that chip's now in. Now one of these legs is obstructing. It doesn't really matter because I'm not using 5-pin switches, so that won't get in the way. If you are using 5-pin switches, then don't have to do that one. It's the easiest way of doing it. Okay, the reason for this is because we want to test this. So because you can't test the board until the diodes are in place. You also can't test it until the chip's in place. So let's do that. So to test the board, what we need is a set of pliers. You can use, technically you could use diode legs. They are conductive. So first we should be flashing this beforehand, but we can flash it now. So plug it in, make sure it lights up. If there are lights on it, like this, I've got the lights turned off by default. So we will go to this view, which gives us this, and keyboard checker. Now we should get hopefully a key lighting up if I have managed to do this correctly, which it doesn't appear to have. Now then, why is that not doing that correctly? That's a worry. I want to have killed the whole board, so there is the possibility this is a bad chip. I shall be right back. Just plain square. Yeah, plain square. And it's done. Yeah. It must be the chip. Reset. I don't know. Okay. Oh, there's no way. I ain't gonna be facing this way, am I? I was facing this way. No, because I took myself down. Didn't I? Took it off this, and this works. Oh. No. So does that one either. Damn it. Brilliant. No. Odd. Okay. That is a bad chip. It's a bad chip. Oh. Well, I said I wasn't going to show you how to socket a chip, but guess I am. That's it, luckily I have spares of things. Oh, I suppose this also demonstrates why use the legs rather than the pins. So the pins, for example on this one, these pins are square and thus won't go in the circular. So if I were to use these headers, then it wouldn't work in that. So, the way to socket a chip, at least the way I do it, it's not the perfect way. I don't know if there is a perfect link. So, take a different socket. You could also use the strips, obviously. Make sure you're doing this the right way around. So, on this particular build, its logo chips down. So the reason I do this technique is different to like just sticking it on, is because it fouls. So it's not flat. So that's flat, as you can potentially see. And if the chip is exactly lined up, it's not flat. Now, also, if it was this way around, it won't be flat. So the way I do it is I take a pin, put it in. Put the legs in. Because they're then the right length to get the correct contact on the socket. As I say, because we've just built this with all the diodes, we have tons of legs. There's no reason to keep them afterwards. So let's not bother with that one. Try and get the straightest legs possible in order to do this, making this easier on yourself. And you don't have to do all of them, so let's do that number first. So we want to get the pins through the holes. Now on the Elite C, for example, casters, I think the word is, it allows you to do side mounts and through holes. Excuse me. But we are just going to go straight through. So that's one side. So you can do this. I'm looking like I'm making a pig's ear of this, and the reason I'm doing that is because I am making a pig's ear of it, which is an interesting expression. Let's just do this the easiest way possible. Find a hole. And do 4 on each side to start with. I want to making sure that you kept the same number of spaces. So they're all in. So now it looks like that. As you can see, it's in there, and now we just need to solder the chip in. So we're not soldering it into this socket. So what we're trying to do is just get the legs soldered into the chip. Making sure that we don't get any solder, we don't bridge any of the pins. the best, to the point where I'm going to do that slightly again on this way around. As I say, making certain that we don't bridge any of the pins. Once you're happy with that, then we cut the legs off, just like we did on the diodes. Okay. So now we should be able to take this chip out of the socket, like so. Now, because of this, you've now got a set of pins that you can hold the chip in with, and then you can put the rest of the legs in. Now you can reuse the pins, as I'm doing right now, or you can just use the legs from the build. Okey-dokey. Let's do this side, and then we'll move around, cut the legs off, and move around to the other side. Now, once you've done this, you want to obviously make certain that you can still take the chip out of the socket. It is possible, whilst doing this, to get too much solder in, and thus fuse the socket. As you can see, I managed to get it out. So we should be good. Next side. last pin doesn't look the best to me, so I'm just going to touch it up. There we go. So hopefully we haven't soldered the chip in, and it should come out. Which it has. Now we definitely need to flash it. So, see, chip is alive, which is always good. And now we need to flash it. So, switch to this one. So, I was going to show this later, but we'll do it now. So, I'll change this to QMK. Okay. So, we need to stick this into DFU mode. Now, the Elite C is awesome for this, because the Elite C has a reset button. Now, if it didn't have a reset button, you need to bridge 2 pins, which I will show you. The 2 pins are the reset pin and the ground pin. And on this, those 2 pins are those 2 pins. Let's try that again. So, not the end one, but it's a bit bright with that light. So, there is 2 pins on this. So we can flash it with using this and hit those 2 pins together, and you'll see that QMK has detected that those pins are. So flash this chip. Let's try pressing the button on the actual interface, not the one on the screen on OBS. So that is now flashed with the firmware. Now we can plug this in, and we'll see if I have completely screwed it up and that chip was fine, or if that chip was bad. As I said, because I took it out of a previous build, I might have got it wrong. I might have broken it. So, chip in, plug it in, hopefully hitting my mic repeatedly, always good for sound. So now I'll switch this back to the browser. Tester, and if all is good, plug it in, always good, plug it in, and hopefully we get keys appearing. Yep, that chip is bad. Let's get rid of that chip. And as you can see now, because of this, what we can do is we can go through every single key and make sure they all trigger. Now, this is a QAZ, so it only has the ones there, because they hooked together. Anyone that doesn't appear, we need to figure out why. So, just going through every single one. And making sure they all light up. Now, there is keys here that will not have lit up, and the reason for that is that, for example, if I press this one, for example, this one, does control, no, this one, so this one doesn't have anything, but it actually has, well, you've just seen, it's actually one of my macro keys. So I need to plug this back in. Not that way around, this one. So because it triggered, I know that every single key on this works. Good. Right then, now let's take the chip off again. So again, just gently prising it off. Now, I have definitely just bent some pins. So luckily, again, another thing to show you, is if you bend pins on this, all you need to do is take your tweezers and straighten them up. Do it gently, that way, not to snap your pins off, because then that's a different thing entirely. Once they're mostly straight, it's fine. Because what we can do then is we can straighten it using the actual socket itself, where we need to. Right then, that is now, in theory, a working board. So the next thing to do is the stabilizers. So for this we'll need 2 screws, which come with your stabilizers. And the only reason you need 2 is because there's only 2 screw holes. No, there isn't. There's 2 screw holes per stabilizer. So you need 4 screws, because there's 2 stabilizers. As I keep saying, this is my first build on screen, so it's definitely going to be rough. Okay. So, stabilizers. Now, I'd recommend, this is a good kit, the iFixit kit. It's not needed, but as long as it's got a P0 or P1, a P1 is your normal screwdriver, to be honest. You can screw stabilizers in. So, these go in. There's only one way of doing stabilizers. There is a large hole and a small hole. So, I'm doing a split keyboard. Now there are that position and that position. That's for a single key spacebar. These 2, 4 are for split spacebar. So that's the one I'm using. So the bar end goes in a little large hole and slots in, and then goes in, and then we screw in from the underside. Now again, the benefit of the iFixit kit is it's a magnetic screwdriver. Now if you get, so these are QMK stabilizers. These are the first time I've used these. I prefer Durox, unfortunately. Place where I normally buy keyboard stuff, they were out of Durox. They had these in stock. Durox come with little washers so they don't short. Now there's nowhere for them to short on this board. For example, on the HS60 there is one of these is shortable, so I would recommend using washers. Now you do get, in a sense, washers. They are the offsets for this board, but they are, then you'll have one less, so I'd recommend some nylon washers. So next up we are going sure this is in. Again, make sure they still work as stabilizers. That is, oh no, we do need the screws for screwdriver 4 when we're putting the case together. So, now we need to start sticking switches in. And we're up to the 3-hour mark on this build. So, let's pop all these switches out, because we don't want them in. We're going to put them in as needed. So, just push from underneath. Just literally, just make sure you don't push the pins. And push them out. Now the way I prefer to solder switches in is I prefer to do stabilized switches and corner switches, just so it's got a stable point. Now, because of the size of this board, that's all you need really to do before you can start sticking the rest of the switches in. Now I'm taking all of them out, even though I'm going to put this one, this one, this one, and this one back in. Could leave this one in. But the reason I do the stabilizer switches first is it just gives you a bit of stability. No other reason than that. Then, okay, I'm actually going to do this one at the same time as this one. The reason for that is those are the only two you can't then get to easily again, because the chip's going to go on top. So once they're in, now they go through the holes on the back. I will show you probably once I've actually soldered them in, to be honest. Corners. Again, even though I just said I was only going to do those. Corners, the ones with the stabilizers, obviously for 60% build, for example, like this one. There are more stabilizers. There's a stabilizer under that. Those two, that, and that. And again, the reason I do the corners is just for stability purposes. You can just do the whole lot if you really want to. I just do the corners for stability. So now they're in. So you want to make certain that the pins have come out. Let's try and get this a good angle. So you want to make certain the pins have. Can I focus this? Just about. So the pins have come out the end. Okay, now they're in. Let's solder them in. Now I was going to mil-max this, but I've had enough problems already, so I can't be bothered doing Now you want to make certain that the whole pin and receptacle is covered, because this is the only part that holds them really in place. So you want good contact between the pin and the, well, it's technically a socket, because that's how you register your keys. Plus, if you do it in like some kind of semi-order like this, you're less likely to miss, because there's, for every switch there are 2 pins to solder, so the chance of you missing one out of that, relatively high. Even if it's only one on one switch, your board may work immediately, but the problem is if you knock it, then it'll lose contact, and then you won't know why. Whereas if you do it methodically, it then you're then less likely to miss anything. So now those are in place, what I would recommend is sticking the switch socket back on, and we'll do another test. Now I should have, when I was soldering, I should have switched the camera back, to be honest. So we will do that in a second. There we go. Right. So this works. So we should now get a Q, a P, and L, possibly. I'm not sure. We should get control. We should get space and delete, I believe. So Q, P, control. That was a quote. Return and space. We know that this. Oh, did I miss one? Missed one. Option. We know now that this works. So let's take the socket off, because if you're soldering, let's try that again. If you're soldering, I would recommend, especially on one of these boards, I would recommend not having your chip attached at the time when you're soldering, because the sheer amount of heat going through is not good. So let's switch the camera back to soldering. Okay. And we can now stick literally the rest in if you want to. I'm just going to do row solder, row solder, row solder. Mainly so I don't miss any. Because the worst thing is also make sure that your pins are straight. That isn't. Again, just tweezers, straighten it up. Don't be too rough with it. Straighten it up. So they're all in. Again, making sure that all the pins come through the holes, because if you missed one, it's possibly bent and it missed the hole. Don't force it in if it does have resistance. I mean, you'll have some resistance from the fact that it's going into the FR4, but don't force it into the hole, because otherwise you will most likely have missed the hole with the pin, in which case you're going to need to take it out and straighten it. Again, what you're trying to do is make sure that there is contact between the pin and the pad. So you're trying to make sure there's enough solder covering the surface area of it. Try not to breathe too many of the fumes in from the solder, as the flux that's making the smell of the nothing else. Still not good for you. And that's it for that row. Now you can, if you want to, plug it back in, check it again, make sure it works. I'm not going to bother with that until the end. Just do each row at a time. This is what I said. So don't force it in, because you'll bend a pin, like I just did. Just make sure it's nicely seated. All the pins are out. 2 more lines to go. Well, it's not even that many, because we've already done quite half, most, well, yeah, most of it. I would say there's just not enough that we could just do them all at once, but to be honest, I'd rather do this methodically because the chance of missing one is relatively high. You do start to get a bit blind to them. This one's not liking going in. Excess solder from a previous build on that switch. And then make sure that all the pins are coming through. And the last 4 switches. And now we'll just do one last test to make sure. So again, chip back on. This is one of the trickiest bits, to be honest. Get this all lined up correctly. There we go. And then, now if we do one last test to make sure, let's switch back to that camera. We have sure which one that one is. Not sure. That one's probably lower. I will just verify with my map what that is. This is not the right map. Excuse me. So this didn't appear because that's actually lower. So if I do that and that, delete. If I do this and this, I should get 1. And if I do that, it flips the screen because that's my macro key. Right then, back to this screen. Now, the next step is building the case. So we have no reason for the soldering iron to be on. So we've done soldering. We could clear that up, but I'll leave it for now. So the next step is building the case. And by building the case, I mean literally screwing in this bottom plate, because that is the whole of this case. So, the way I'd recommend doing this is, now you'll get 4 of these things with your QAZ. So the way I'd recommend doing this is 1 screw in, washer offset on, and then this. Now, if you have socketed, this will be larger because it goes in the hole. This is literally just, if you socket it right, then it should sit fine. If on the other hand it doesn't, the way I'd recommend it is using 2 offsets and then using none. So I'll do 2 for each. Now, luckily, I've actually managed to do this pretty damn close, so I don't need these extra offsets, which I did just in case I took out of a different QAZ. So I can put them back. But we'll verify that I don't need to do any more once we screw it in. Of course, if we drop one, it doesn't matter. And that's a right beggar to find. So, QAZ. If it's the same way as the, they both face the same way. It goes in. Right. So, it is slightly, as you can see, it is slightly wobbly. And this is because of that. It's because of 2 pins on my thing. So to solve this, I'm going to put another 2 offsets on each, because I have enough spares. I'm going to put another 2 offsets on each, and another offset on each of these. And Again, always dropping things is a good idea. Can I see that? No, I can't. It doesn't matter how I got off. I'll just do that.
Are you on mute now?
Yeah.
I need you to help me lift the dog into the bath.
Okay.
I need to shower her.
Can I do it in literally like 10 minutes? It's literally, I'm literally got like 10 minutes.
Millies. Alright, I'll speak to you later.
You don't do.
I will.
Oh, okay.
Alright. Come here, Lucy. Bye. Thanks. Bye. We've had a good wander, haven't we?
Where'd you go? I thought you were taking me to some point.
Did not look on found me.
No. You want to tell me?
What?
What I'm going to do is 10 minutes then?
No, it's fine.
Okay. Okay. So now, they're both, I've doubled the offsets now on that. So next is the bumpy feet. This is a spare offset. Next is the bumpy feet. So the way I put these bumpy feet, I literally put them in the corners. Now, if you think you're never going to need it, do it, you can just cover them, the screws, but the corners is fine. Bumpy feet. Now that's done, we will just make certain that this is now, I mean, it's less wobbly, it's not fouling anymore. It's not perfect, but you know, it's an FR4 plate, never gonna be perfect. So next we screw in the last 4 screws. That again, let's drop one, always a good plan. These aren't magnetic, it would appear. No, they're definitely not magnetic. have spares of all the screws I need. But I would not recommend dropping them, they are pretty small. Right then, that is now a built QAZ. Now I just need to stick keycaps on. Now keycaps are a tricky one for this because you need some pretty odd sizes. Now I would recommend, personally I would recommend a blank set rather than a set with legends on, and the main reason behind that is you're not going to get it. I think there's like 2 sets that have the correct legends for this board. So it's these. So I have blanks, so I'm going to do all the alphas in whites. I believe I've got enough whites. I have got these are also O-ringed, which is a little rubber ring that goes around the things to stop it bottoming out. Now for the ones, the space bars, this is where it gets tricky. I can't remember which way around these go, because they are not the same size. One is slightly smaller than the other. I would recommend leaving these to the end, but when you do them, be quite gentle, because if you pop the stabilizer out, it's almost impossible to get it back in unless you do desoldering. Definitely don't know what to do. That's definitely a deep dish. Deep dish is for the, yes, right, so these are all the same then. So I would I mean, it's up to you, obviously. This hobby is full of preference. I would recommend DSA, especially for this board, to be honest. This is where the colours don't quite work. Because this is not the same size. So this is actually one of these that's needed. Same for this one. So ASD F is a deep dish. Slightly wider one, which I think is this one. Yep. Right then. Now it's a case of figuring out which way we want this. So this is space and this is enter. So as I say, with these you want to be forceful and gentle at the same time because you don't want to pop the stabilizer. Because that is a world of hurt. So that is now a built QAZ. And we can plug it in. We can do a typing test. Super. Yep. One could do it on its settings. So go with that. Yeah. Let's try that again, shall we? Tab. And I can't type. I have this set to bad setting on this one. Oh. That's true. I am doing terrible. It does help if you're not looking at the wrong screen. Yeah. It takes a while to get, because you're not because I'm used to different board. My fingers are used to being slightly off. It also doesn't help the fact that I really can't type right now. Well, it proves it works. And congratulations. Yeah, that is a built QAZ, and if you followed along and you've not left after 3.5 hours, well, you might have. Congratulations, you have now built your own QAZ.